Hey everyone! Today we're talking about one of the most epic battles in history, the Battle of Agincourt. This incredible showdown happened on October 25, 1415, during the long and intense 100 Years' War between England and France. It's where Henry V of England pulled off a stunning victory against a much larger French army. How did he do it? Well, it wasn't luck. It was a combination of strategy, discipline, and the sheer power of the English longbow. The French made some big mistakes, relying heavily on their cavalry in terrain that wasn't suited for it. Add to that some pretty chaotic leadership on their side, and you've got a recipe for disaster. Meanwhile, Henry's forces held their ground with discipline, smart positioning, and those deadly longbows, turning the odds completely in their favor. The result? A crushing defeat for the French. This wasn't just a win on the battlefield, it was a turning point. After Agincourt, Henry could march into Normandy and eventually push towards Paris with much less resistance. A few years later, under the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, Henry not only became the regent of France, but was also named the heir to the French throne, thanks to the weakened French king Charles VI. That's some serious payoff for one battle, right? And here's the thing about Henry V. He didn't just win battles, he became a legend. Writers like William Shakespeare played a huge role in shaping his image as a heroic king, making sure his name would be celebrated for centuries. The Battle of Agincourt still stands as one of the most famous moments in English history, inspiring countless works of art, literature, and even songs. Now, let's zoom out a bit and talk about the 100 Years' War itself. This wasn't just one war, but a whole series of conflicts between England and France that started way back in 1337. It all kicked off because Edward III of England claimed he had a right to the French throne. His mom, Isabella, was the daughter of a French king, Philip IV, so Edward thought that gave him a shot. But the French kings weren't exactly lining up to hand over their crown. When the war began, England started strong. They smashed a French fleet at Sluys in 1340 and won two major battles at Crécy in 1346 and Poitiers in 1356. These victories showed just how effective the English longbow could be against the French, even when the English were heavily outnumbered. At Poitiers, Edward III's son, known as the Black Prince, captured the French king John II. This led to the Treaty of Bretigny in 1360, where Edward gave up his claim to the throne but gained control over a quarter of France. But the war didn't stay one-sided. After a period of peace, the French started to fight back under Charles V, also known as Charles the Wise. He avoided big battles that might play to England's strengths, and instead chipped away at their territory. By the late 1370s, England was left with only Calais and a thin strip of Gascony. Things stayed relatively quiet during the reign of Richard II of England, but when Henry V took the throne in 1413, it was game on again. Henry wasn't just a skilled leader, he was ambitious. With French pirates causing chaos in the English Channel and the French kingdom in disarray, thanks to Charles VI, madness and infighting among the French nobility, Henry saw an opportunity. Backed by English barons, Parliament, and the Church, he was ready for action. He invaded Normandy in 1415 with about 10,000 men, capturing the port of Harfleur after a tough siege. But by the time he left Harfleur in October, his forces were already down to around 6,000 to 7,000 due to heavy fighting and a brutal outbreak of dysentery. Henry decided to retreat to English, held Calais to regroup, but getting there wasn't easy. The French destroyed bridges, heavily guarded crossings, and even burned their own countryside to starve the English of supplies. It wasn't until October 19th that Henry found a shallow point to cross the Somme River near Voyant. As the English made their way towards the coast, things took a dramatic turn. A massive French army intercepted them. And the Battle of Agincourt wasn't just a story of strategy, but also a testament to the weapons and soldiers that shaped its outcome. Both the English and French armies relied on heavy cavalry, men-at-arms, and infantry, but the English longbow once again stole the spotlight. It was the ultimate medieval weapon, standing over 5 feet tall, made from yew wood and strung with hemp. The arrows, crafted from ash or oak, were not just long but deadly, capable of piercing even the finest armor of the day. A skilled archer could fire up to 15 arrows a minute, creating a relentless rain of death. On the other hand, the French relied more on crossbows. While easier to train soldiers to use, they were slower, firing 1 bolt for every 5 arrows the English could release. The English strategy was simple but effective. Position the archers on the flanks to target the less armored areas of French horses and their riders. The stakes driven into the ground around the archers formed a defensive barrier, making direct charges nearly suicidal. The French forces outnumbered the English significantly, perhaps 3 or even 5 to 1, but numbers alone weren't enough. The terrain was against them. The battlefield was a muddy nightmare, worsened by rain and the recent plowing of fields. This boggy ground, combined with the weight of their armor, made movement for the French troops sluggish and exhausting. The English army, though smaller, was disciplined and strategically positioned in a narrow depression flanked by dense woodlands. This forced the French to attack head-on, neutralizing their numerical advantage. The French commanders, Constable Charles d'Albret and Marshal Boucicaut, had suggested a more cautious approach, surrounding and starving the English. But impetuous young nobles overruled them, favoring a full frontal assault. As the battle commenced, the French archers and crossbowmen tried to soften the English lines with a few volleys, but it was ineffective. Their cavalry charged next, but the confined space and English arrows wreaked havoc. Horses fell, knights were unseated, and chaos rippled through the French lines. The cavalry's failure left their infantry exposed, and when the main body of French men-at-arms advanced, the same mud and narrow defile turned the battlefield into a killing ground. English archers, having fired their arrows, joined the melee, wielding mallets, axes, and swords. The mud, already thick with rain, became a quagmire of fallen men and horses. The weight of armor became a deadly burden as knights who fell found themselves trapped, suffocating in the filth, or crushed by those who followed. The French losses were staggering. Thousands of their nobility and soldiers lay dead. Among them were prominent figures like the Constable of France, 3 dukes, and numerous counts and barons. For the English, losses were remarkably low, a few hundred at most, though they mourned figures like Edward Plantagenet, Duke of York, and the young Earl of Suffolk. Henry V's leadership was undeniable. Despite being outnumbered and in foreign territory, he not only stood with his men but led them decisively. At one point, hearing that a French group had attacked the English baggage train, he ordered the grim execution of prisoners, a brutal act that French historians have not forgotten. The victory at Agincourt solidified Henry's reputation as one of England's great monarchs. When he returned to London in November 1415, the reception was nothing short of royal theatre. The streets were alive with choirs, banners, and cheers. Captured French nobles were paraded as symbols of triumph, a poignant reminder of the scale of the victory. In the years that followed, Henry capitalized on the momentum. Normandy fell, and he marched toward Paris, culminating in the Treaty of Troques in 1420. This treaty named Henry as regent and heir to the French throne, cementing his ambitions. But, as fate would have it, Henry's glory was fleeting. His untimely death in 1422, likely from dysentery, left the English crown vulnerable. Joan of Arc's rise and the resurgence of French forces under Charles VII turned the tide. By the end of the Hundred Years' War in 1453, England's continental ambitions were reduced to a single holdout, Calais. What followed was another chapter of turmoil back home, the Wars of the Roses. The Battle of Agincourt, though, remains a shining moment in English history, a day when strategy, discipline, and a bit of luck overcame overwhelming odds. It's no wonder it's remembered, not just in history books, but in art, literature, and the enduring legacy of Henry V himself.